Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 10 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam on the third canto. And we are right at the end of the fourth chapter. Just not many verses to go. And as soon as we finish, we'll just go straight into the fifth chapter, of course. All right, so first of all, though, let us offer our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Niravishesha Shunyavadi Pastyachadesha Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchkalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Okay, devotees, so, right, we are in chapter 4, and fourth section, Krishna instructs Uddhava before departing, before Krishna departs, actually, yeah. Right, and that's from verse 28 to verse 34. We are on verse 29, and then following that there's just two verses, 35, 36, so, it's almost inevitable that we'll finish this chapter 4 and then go straight into chapter 5. All right, so here we go, verse 29. Shukadev Goswami replied, "My dear king, the cursing of the Brahmins was only a plea. But the actual fact was the supreme desire of the Lord. He wanted to disappear from the face of the earth after dispatching his excessively numerous family members. He thought to himself as follows." So Srila Prabhupada gives fairly substantial purport here. Let's go through it. So first thing Prabhupada says that in this particular verse, the word tyakshan, it's the first word of the last line of the Sanskrit. Tyakshan is significant in relation to Lord Sri Krishna leaving his body. His body, yeah. So, of course, normally we understand very clearly, and as we've been going through Bhagavatam just the last so many weeks and months, Prabhupada has repeatedly made the point that Lord Krishna and his transcendental body are identical. It's not like us. We have a body, and in our previous life we had a completely different body, and like that. And even during the course of this lifetime, our current body is changing and changing. So with Lord Krishna, it's completely different. And again, Srila Prabhupada makes this point in this first paragraph, that the form of the Lord is the eternal form of existence, knowledge, and bliss. His body and his self are identical. So therefore Prabhupada raises the question, and we can also, how could he leave a body when disappearing? And Prabhupada makes the point that there's a controversy amongst the non-devotees, Mayavadis and people like that, about the Lord's disappearance. But Srila Jiva Goswami and Krishna Sandarbha has cleared it up. So we go on to the second paragraph, and Prabhupada refers to Brahma Samhita, which says that the Lord has so many forms, unlimited forms. And when he comes as Krishna, all these different forms amalgamate within him. Then on top of that, he even has his universal form, which he showed Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Of course, that's another thing altogether, but it's a body. It's definitely a body. Otherwise, his body is Satchitananda, eternal, fully conscious, and fully blissful. And the devotees, it's just about the first thing that the devotees find out about the Lord when they start really looking into who is Krishna. Yeah, so it's simple for the devotees to understand that the Lord and his body are one. He is his body. But the non-devotees, oh gosh, either they don't understand or they make some strange arguments and Prabhupada says, try to defeat the eternity of the transcendental body of the Lord. Prabhupada concludes that paragraph, this is due to the defect called the cheating propensity of the imperfect living entities. So on we go then into the third paragraph of the purport, that Prabhupada explains, of course, that we have so much experience of devotees worshipping the transcendental form of the Lord in temples and having factual realization that the form of the deity in the temple is non-different from the Lord. Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita chapter 7 verse 25, in which Krishna says he reserves the right not to be exposed to everyone. Then Prabhupada refers to famous verse from Padma Purana, although it's quoted in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, very fundamental verse about the nature of the Lord. Atakshi Krishna Namadi Nabhaved Grahyam Indriyai. Yes, his form cannot be perceived by material senses. Prabhupada then makes the point, when he appears within the vision of mundane people, he assumes the form of the Virat Rupa, or the universal form. Right. And Prabhupada says in the middle of this paragraph, this is an additional material exhibition of form and is supported by the logic of a subject and its adjectives. And then Prabhupada gives a grammatical explanation. In grammar, when an adjective is taken away from the subject it modifies, the subject doesn't change. How's that? So, in other words, when we say that this is a big house, if we drop the adjective is big, and we just say, this is a house, the house doesn't get changed. Yeah. The subject, the house, doesn't get changed by us not mentioning the size of it. So similarly, when the Lord quits his Virat Rupa, his universal form, when he leaves it, his eternal form doesn't change. Although, as Prabhupada says, there's no material difference between himself and any of his forms, innumerable forms. So Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, in the 5th canto it'll be seen how the Lord is worshipped in different planets in his different forms, even now, and how he's worshipped in different temples of this earth also. So we go on to the 4th paragraph, last paragraph of this quite substantial purport. Prabhupada begins by explaining that Srila Jiva Goswami and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur have elaborately discussed the Lord's disappearance in their commentaries, quoting different authentic shastras, Vedic literatures. And Prabhupada says that to avoid increasing the volume of the book, we're not going to include them. But still, the entire point is explained in Bhagavad Gita, as mentioned above, that the Lord reserves the right of not being exposed to everyone. He always keeps out of the vision of non-devotees who have no love, and this removes them further from the Lord. They're already removed, but now they get removed further. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the Lord appeared on the invitation of Brahma, who prayed before the Kshirodakshai Vishnu, and therefore when the Lord appeared, all the forms of Vishnu amalgamated with him, and when the mission was fulfilled, all of them disintegrated from him in the usual course. Okay. So, now the Lord, these verses it's the Lord thinking to himself as he prepares to leave. So verse 30, it's the Lord considering what to do. Now he's going to leave. Now I shall leave the vision of this mundane world, and I see that Uddhava, the foremost of my devotees, is the only one who can be directly entrusted with knowledge about me. So Srila Prabhupada again gets a bit more into analyzing the Sanskrit words used in the verse. Up till now, sort of around this point in the Bhagavatam, he hasn't really done that much. But now he's doing it, and we'll see he sort of continues to do it from time to time through this third canto. So Prabhupada points out that the words Jnanam Mad Ashrayam they are significant in this verse. This is now, these are some words from the second line of the verse. And it means, Jnana Mad Ashrayam means, if you just look at the word for word, knowledge concerning myself. So this is significant here. And then Srila Prabhupada talks about the three levels of transcendental knowledge: impersonal Brahman, all-pervading Supersoul, and ultimately the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, or Bhagavan, being the highest. So out of those three, the specific knowledge of the Lord himself in Goloka is the most, has special significance, and it's known as Bhagavat Tattva Vijnana, or specific knowledge of the personality of Godhead. So this knowledge is understood, Prabhupada explains, it is realized by pure devotional service and nothing else. That's confirmed, of course, in Bhagavad Gita 18:55, and you'll see Prabhupada refers to it and quotes about half of that verse here. Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavan yaschasmi tattvataha. Only persons engaged in devotional service can factually know the transcendental position of the Lord. So Uddhava is amongst the very best of the devotees of Lord Krishna when Krishna was present. Of course, that's There's the Brijbasis and ultimately the Gopis and ultimately Radharani. But this is a different point, really, particularly those devotees in Dwaraka. Uddhava's definitely very, very special amongst them. So therefore, in that sense, Prabhupada says Uddhava was considered to be the best amongst all devotees of that time, and therefore he was directly instructed by the grace of the Lord, so that later people could take advantage of that instruction from the Lord, like people like us. Yes. So, and Prabhupada makes interesting point. This is one of the reasons why Uddhava was advised to go to Badrik Ashram, where the Lord is personally represented or present as the Naranarayan deity. Yeah. So the point is that advanced devotees can get direct inspiration from the temple deity. Yeah. And so a devotee always takes shelter of recognized temples to make advancement in transcendental knowledge by the grace of the Lord. Verse 31. And again, it's Lord Krishna basically thinking to himself, Uddhava is not inferior to me in any way because he's never affected by the modes of material nature. Therefore, he may remain in this world in order to disseminate specific knowledge of the personality of Godhead. Right. And you know, I've mentioned before, but we could just note that the Lord is going to elaborately instruct Uddhava. What he says is not really recorded right here in the 3rd canto. But in the 11th canto, it appears, it's the Uddhava Gita, which covers quite a number of chapters, many chapters of the 11th canto. So this is the knowledge which Lord Krishna is thinking about right here. So Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, the specific qualification for becoming the representative of the Lord is to be unaffected by the material modes of nature. Yeah. And then Prabhupada goes on that on the material level, the highest qualification a person can have is to be a Brahmin, means to be really in the mode of goodness. But still not transcendental, not high enough, not sufficient to become a representative of the Lord. In order to become a representative of the Lord, you have to transcend the goodness, which is the hallmark of the Brahman. And you have to come to the Shuddha Sattva stage of pure goodness, or the Vasudev stage, which is the stage of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or at least the level on which he reveals himself. Then you can realize the science of God. So, and Prabhupada goes on that as the Lord's not affected by the modes, the pure devotee is also not affected. And that's the primary qualification for becoming, quote unquote, one with the Lord. Not one in the impersonal sense. Yeah. But one meaning just having accepted the mission and the happiness of the Lord, giving happiness to the Lord as one's own mission in life. The Lord's mission becomes your mission. Right, so people on this level, Prabhupada says, are called Jivan Mukta, liberated jivas, although they're apparently on the material level They have material bodies. They have to eat and all these things. So that level, Prabhupada quotes Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. It's achieved by constant engagement in devotional service. So, where this Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu verse is quoted, I'm saying this is now the second paragraph of this purport. And I'll just read the translation. It's a famous, famous verse. Anyone who by his actions, mind, and words lives only for the transcendental loving service of the Lord is certainly a liberated soul, even though he may appear to be in a condition of material existence. So Uddhava was like that. He was in such a transcendental position. And therefore Krishna selected him to be his representative after Krishna had left, in the physical absence of the Lord. Yeah. So Prabhupada says, such a devotee of the Lord is never affected by material strength, intelligence, or even renunciation. Such a devotee can withstand all the onslaughts of material nature. So therefore, such a devotee is known as Goswami. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, only such Goswamis can penetrate the mysteries of the Lord's transcendental, loving relationships. So we go on to verse 32. Shukadev Goswami informed the king that Uddhava, being thus instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all Vedic knowledge and the spiritual master of the three worlds, reached the pilgrimage site of Badrik Ashram and engaged himself there in trance to satisfy the Lord. So again, there's a fairly substantial purport. Prabhupada begins by pointing out Krishna's the spiritual master of the three worlds, the source of Vedic knowledge, the original source. But still, it's difficult for people, means ordinary people on the material level. It's difficult for them to understand the personal feature of the absolute truth, even by studying the Vedas. Yeah. Vedeshu durlabham, adurlabham atma bhakto. That's Brahma Samhita. That durlabham, it's very difficult to realize the Lord just by reading the Vedas, but through bhakti, it's not difficult. So, therefore, the Lord's personal instructions are needed in order to understand the Lord as the supreme absolute truth. And Prabhupada says, Bhagavad Gita is the evidence of such transcendental knowledge in gist. It means sort of in a basic sense, foundational sense, you could say. Otherwise, one cannot know the Supreme Lord unless one is graced by him. Lord Krishna gave this mercy to Arjuna and Uddhava when he was here. Yes, really. So, of course, he already gave it to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita, but he's just about to give it to Uddhava in the form of the Uddhava Gita, although, like we said, we're only going to meet it in the 11th canto. So Prabhupada goes on that Bhagavad Gita was spoken by the Lord on the battlefield to encourage Arjuna to fight. But in order to understand the personal feature of the Lord more clearly, his personal instructions are needed, and therefore the Uddhava Gita was spoken. Yes. So Prabhupada makes the point, Krishna is the source of Vedic knowledge. One who can't understand the Lord by going through the Vedas can take shelter of a devotee like Uddhava or Arjuna, and in that way understand the Lord. And Brahma Samhita, we already just quoted that verse. Yeah, Vedeshu Durlabham, difficult to understand by studying the Vedas, but Prabhupada says, easily understood from a devotee like Uddhava. So yeah, we're getting down through the second paragraph. Out of the Lord's mercy to the devotees in Bhadrak Ashram, the Lord sent Uddhava there to speak on his behalf. And Prabhupada concludes the second paragraph by saying, unless one has such authorization, one cannot understand or preach the devotional service of the Lord. So on to the third paragraph. And Prabhupada explains that Krishna, while here, did many uncommon things. He even traveled in space to get the Parijata. He recovered the son of Sandipani Muni after the boy died. So Uddhava understood. Uddhava understood so much, actually. He knew of the conditions of life on other planets, and the devotees in Bhadrak Ashram were very anxious to hear it. And the Lord was also, the Naranarayan deities, they wanted to hear the message from Krishna via Uddhava. So this is all very transcendental. So such a message, Prabhupada says at the end of the paragraph, such a message must have been more confidential than the knowledge described in the pages of the Vedas, or even for that matter in Bhagavad Gita, actually. So then there's the fourth paragraph. Krishna, of course, is the source of all knowledge. And the messages sent through Uddhava to the Naranarayan deity and the sages in Bhadrak Ashram, they're also part of Vedic knowledge. It's not like they're something else, but they're more confidential. Therefore, they could only be sent, could only be understood when presented by a pure devotee like Uddhava. So, and Prabhupada makes the point that since such confidential knowledge was known only to Krishna and Uddhava, therefore it's said that Uddhava is as good as Krishna. And Prabhupada makes the point that every living entity can become a confidential messenger like Uddhava on the same level as the Lord, provided he becomes confidential through loving devotional service. So such knowledge, Prabhupada goes on to say, it's entrusted, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, only to devotees like Uddhava and Arjuna, and devotees, Srila Prabhupada, we can also add. And we have to learn the mystery through them only. Otherwise, you can't understand Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam if you don't have their help. So Prabhupada refers to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur that the confidential message must have concerned the mystery of the Lord's departure and the annihilation of the Yadus at the end of his time on the planet. Everyone must have been anxious to know these things, so the Lord must have explained to Uddhava, and then Uddhava was sent to Bhadrak Ashram to inform the deities, Naranarayan and others. Okay, so verse 33. 3. Vidura also heard from Uddhava about the appearance and disappearance of Lord Krishna, the Supersoul, in the mortal world, which is a subject matter sought after with great perseverance by the great sages. So just little hints are given here of what Uddhava must have instructed. What Krishna must have instructed Uddhava in. Yeah. So anyway, here, verse 33, there's a purport. Prabhupada makes the point, the appearance and disappearance of the Lord is a mystery even for great sages. Yeah. And again, another Sanskrit term, the word Paramatmana is significant here. We are called Atma, but the Lord is Paramatma, the super soul. So anyway, he's never an ordinary living being like us, but still his appearance as one of the human, as apparently a human, and his disappearance from this world, they're subject matters, Prabhupada says, for research workers who execute research work with great perseverance. He's referring to devotees like yourselves who are studying Srimad Bhagavatam very intensively and in great detail. So it's of increasing interest because the researchers, they have to then search out the abode of the Lord, where he goes after his pastimes. But still, even great sages, not really devotees, but still, even great sages have no information of the spiritual world beyond this world. The devotees do, of course, but otherwise the mystics, the impersonalists, they don't know that Krishna lives there with his associates, but he comes here sometimes. And then Srila Prabhupada refers to Brahma Samhita, verse 37, that the Lord by his inconceivable potency resides in his eternal abode Goloka, yet at the same time as the Super Soul he is present everywhere in both the spiritual and material skies by his multi-varieties of manifestation. So therefore his appearance and disappearance, they're simultaneously going on, and no one can say, what's the beginning, what's the end? Because his eternal pastimes, Prabhupada says, they have no beginning or end. So therefore, one has to learn about those things from the pure devotees only and not waste time with so-called research work. So-called research work. That's not like doing Bhakti Vaibhava is not so-called research work. Okay, verse 34. The Lord's glorious acts and his acceptance of various transcendental forms for the performance of extraordinary pastimes in the mortal world are very difficult for anyone other than his devotees to understand. And for the beasts, they're simply a mental disturbance. Sure, that's pretty heavy. But of course, it's very true. Prabhupada at least Bhagavatam in the verse itself uses the term Pashunam, means of the animals, the beasts. So Srila Prabhupada says, as the verse says, the forms and pastimes of Krishna, as pointed out in Bhagavad Gita, they're difficult for non-devotees to understand, or even it's not really possible for them to understand, because he never reveals himself. What to speak of just the ordinary materialists who just want to enjoy life on the material level. But he never reveals himself to jnanis and yogis. And particularly those those who envy the Lord, Prabhupada says, from the bottom of their hearts, they're classified amongst the beasts. It's not exactly the jnanis and yogis. Yeah. It's more like just the heavy materialists. And for these people, the beasts, these subjects are just a mental disturbance. Yeah. And that's confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7:15, that the miscreants who simply want to enjoy life and work hard like beasts of burden, they can hardly know him, which is a traditional English way of saying, can hardly know him. It's an English way of saying they just cannot know him, and that's all there is to it. And that's due to the mood, asurika bhava, the demoniac mood. Prabhupada says, a spirit of revolt against the Lord. Then there's a second paragraph of the purport. So the Lord expands for his pastimes in this world, and the appearance and disappearance of those forms, they're difficult subject matters. And therefore Prabhupada goes on to say that for those who are not devotees, better they don't discuss them. Because if they do, with their speculations and all their enviousness and whatever else, they are just going to make more offenses. They're already making offenses, but they'll make more. And the more they try to discuss in that demoniac spirit, the more they go into the darkest regions of hell, as Bhagavad Gita chapter 16, verse 20 says. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, anyone who's against the transcendental loving service of the Lord is more or less a beastly creature, as confirmed in this verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we come to the last section of this chapter, and it's just 2 verses, 35 and 36, and this is now Vidura meets Maitreya. I'll just read them straight through. So verse 35, understanding that he was remembered by Lord Krishna while the Lord was quitting this world, Vidura began to cry loudly, overwhelmed by the ecstasy of love. Can you imagine if you found out that the Lord remembered you? Gosh. So anyway, Prabhupada explains, it's not a big purport, but it's very nice. Vidura was overwhelmed with ecstasy of love when he understood that Krishna had thought of him at the last moment, just as he was about to leave this world. Of course, Vidura, as a great devotee, thought he was insignificant, but he was remembered by the Lord, by his mercy. What a favor! What mercy! So he cried. And Prabhupada says, this crying is the last word in the progressive path of devotional service. Then Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, one who can cry for the Lord in love is certainly successful in the line of devotional service. Really amazing. Okay, and the last verse, there's no purport to it, verse 36. After passing a few days on the bank of the river Yamuna, Vidura, the self-realized soul, reached the bank of the Ganges, where the great sage Maitreya was situated. Okay, so that's the end of the 4th chapter. Okay, devotees, so we'll finish here, and tomorrow we'll carry on. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.